The wind didn't just howl in Wyoming, it screamed. It was a sound like a serrated blade dragging across the eaves of my ranch, a high-pitched metallic whistle that told me the temperature had officially crossed the threshold from bitter to lethal. Inside my shop, the air was warm, smelling of motor oil and old wood, illuminated by the steady, amber glow of my overhead lights. I stood by the window, my coffee cooling in a chipped ceramic mug, and looked out toward the ridge. Down in the valley, the Deer Hollow subdivision looked like a collection of dollhouses. It was a planned community, a phrase that usually meant people with too much time and too little sense paying someone else to tell them what color their front door could be. Then it happened. One house flickered, then the streetlights stuttered. In a single, silent wave, the entire crescent went black. The valley was swallowed by the dark. I checked my gauges, my lights didn't even blink. My ranch wasn't connected to their grid. I'd spent 3 years and a small fortune building a private, redundant system with the same precision I used back when I designed dam infrastructure for the state. I didn't trust the HOA's corner-cutting contractors, and tonight was the ultimate "I told you so." But my gut tightened, something was off. I set the mug down and crossed the room to the breaker panel. The needles were steady, but as I stood there, my eyes drifted to a white envelope sitting on my workbench. It was the notice the HOA had wedged into my gate latch yesterday. Community Utility Land Reclassification. The language was soft, draped in the kind of institutional sweetness that makes your skin crawl. They claimed that the eastern ridge behind my barn, land I bought and paid for 20 years ago, had been absorbed into the community utility zone. They weren't just asking for an easement, they were claiming my dirt was their dirt. And now, with the valley in a deep freeze and the power out, I realized why. I grabbed my heavy coat, stepped into the -20 air, and felt the cold punch me square in the solar plexus. My breath came out in thick white plumes. I trudged toward the utility shed, my boots biting into the ice-crusted snow. Inside, the LED indicators on my secondary panel were glowing green, but one reading caught my eye. An external load spike. A sharp, unnatural pull had tried to use my private conduit as a lifeline. Someone had tapped into my line, and the failure of their shoddy work had likely triggered the very blackout they were currently freezing in. Arrogance is one thing, I whispered into the wind, the cold stinging my throat. But theft, that's going to cost you. By morning, the subdivision was a graveyard of frozen pipes and desperate chimneys. I didn't wait for the sun to fully crest the ridge. I hopped in my truck and drove a mile up the road to see Tom Bennett. Tom was 70, a retired county surveyor who knew where every stone and survey pin in this valley was buried. He looked at the HOA's annexation plat for about 10 seconds before he started chuckling, a dry, raspy sound. "This is sloppy, Jake," Tom said, tapping the paper with a gloved finger. "They used a forged seal. The county hasn't used this embossed stamp in a decade, and look at these coordinates. They shifted your boundary 30 yards east, right over your ridge conduit." "They're trying to build legal cover for a physical theft," I said. My voice was calm, but inside, a very cold gear was beginning to turn. "It's more than that," Tom replied. "If they convince the utility company this is community land, they can seize your infrastructure under the guise of an emergency." I thanked him and drove straight to the county clerk's office. Darla, the clerk, confirmed what I already knew: the HOA's filings were fraudulent. They had been quietly updating their internal maps for months, creating a paper trail of lies, hoping I wouldn't notice until it was too late to fight. "They've submitted 4 updates, Jake," Darla whispered, her eyes wide. "All of them claim your ridge is part of their shared utility zone." "Well," I said, leaning over the counter with a thin, sharp smile, "I noticed." On the drive back, my phone buzzed. It was Bethany Crowell, the HOA president. She was the kind of woman who wore cashmere in the summer and spoke like she was narrating a corporate training video. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice dripping with practiced warmth, "I assume you've seen the outage. It's a community crisis. Given the new alignment of our utility zones, we'll be sending a crew onto the ridge to stabilize the grid. Cooperation is expected." "Bethany," I said, my tone as flat as the Wyoming horizon, "you forged county documents. You're trespassing on private land. If one of your contractors touches that conduit, I'm holding you personally liable for the damages." The warmth evaporated. "Mr. Carter, don't be difficult. That ridge represents a continuity break. We voted to integrate it for the good of the community. You can't vote to take what you don't own. You have fraud, Bethany, not an easement. We'll see about that, she snapped and hung up. I didn't go back to the house, I went to the ridge. Halfway up the slope I saw them, faint tire tracks in the snow, utility-grade dual rear wheels. I followed them to the access panel for my conduit. The bolts were fresh, the tool marks were clean. They hadn't just been here, they had installed a parasitic tap, a leech line trying to siphon my power to kickstart their dead grid. I pulled my trail cameras. I had them hidden in the pines, and when I loaded the footage in my shop I hit the jackpot. High-definition video of a Blue Creek development truck, 3 men and a blueprint. I zoomed in. It was the forged map. They were using a lie to justify a felony. The greed was almost impressive. They wanted my ridge because it was the highest point in the valley, the perfect spot for a new substation they didn't want to pay to permit properly. They were trying to steal a shortcut through my life. The second night was worse. The storm turned into a whiteout and the alarm in my shop finally screamed. External surge detected, load mismatch. I didn't panic, I didn't even rush. I sat down at my terminal and watched the numbers. They were trying again. They had brought in a bigger generator trying to backfeed their system through my conduit. It was a move so reckless it bordered on homicidal. If that load hit my breakers, it could blow my entire shop. But I'd been an engineer for 30 years. I didn't just have breakers, I had a logic gate bypass. I waited until the draw peaked, until I knew their expensive, heavy-duty mobile generator was pinned at max capacity, trying to force power into a line that was currently closed. Then, I didn't just shut the gate, I reversed the phase. A muffled thump echoed from the ridge, followed by a faint blue flash that illuminated the falling snow like a ghost. 10 minutes later, headlights cut through the dark of my driveway, not one pair but 3. I put on my coat, grabbed my heavy flashlight and stepped out onto the porch. Bethany Crowell was there, wrapped in a fur-lined parka, flanked by 2 men in high-vis jackets and a sheriff's deputy I recognized, Deputy Morales. "Mr. Carter," Bethany yelled over the wind, her face twisted in a mask of righteous fury. "You just destroyed $60,000 worth of community equipment. You are interfering with an emergency utility repair." I didn't say a word, I just clicked on my flashlight and bathed her in the beam. She winced, shielding her eyes. "Deputy," I said, my voice steady and dangerously quiet. "I'm glad you're here. I'd like to report a trespass, a grand larceny in progress, and the attempted sabotage of private infrastructure." "Now hold on, Jake," Morales said, stepping forward. "Bethany says this ridge is community property. They're just trying to get the heat back on for 300 families. "Is that what she told you?" I pulled a tablet from my coat pocket. "Here is the deed to this land, filed 20 years ago. Here is the confirmation from the county clerk that the HOA's alignment notice is a forgery. And here." I swiped the screen. Is a 4K video of her contractors cutting my fence and illegally tapping into a high-voltage conduit without a permit, a safety inspection, or my permission. The silence that followed was heavier than the snow. Morales took the tablet, his brow furrowing as he watched the footage of the contractors holding the forged map. "That's not," Bethany started, her voice cracking. "That's an internal document we have the right to." "You have the right to remain silent, Bethany," I interrupted, my sarcastic edge finally sharpening. "Though I'd prefer you keep talking, every word is being recorded by the porch mic." Morales looked at the 2 contractors. "Did you boys know this was private land?" The lead contractor looked at Bethany, then at me, then at the sheriff. "She gave us the map, man. She said it was all cleared, we just did what the board told us." "The board," I said, stepping off the porch, "is about to have a very expensive year." I walked past them, my flashlight cutting a path through the dark. I stopped at my gate where their alignment notice was still fluttering in the wind. I ripped it off and handed it to Morales. "They didn't just try to steal my land," I said, looking Bethany dead in the eye. She looked small now, shrunken inside her expensive coat. "They tried to use my house to fix their mistake. Because they were too cheap to maintain their own grid, they thought they could just take mine." "Jake, the whole neighborhood is freezing," Bethany pleaded, her entitlement finally turning into desperation. "You have power, you have the conduit, just let us use it until the county trucks get here." I looked at the dark houses in the valley, then back at her. I might have considered it, I said, if you'd asked like a neighbor, but you came as a conqueror. And in Wyoming, Bethany, we don't take kindly to people who redraw lines that aren't theirs to touch. I turned to Morales. I want them off my property. Now, if I see a flashlight on that ridge tonight, I'm not calling you. I'm filing for an immediate injunction and calling the state electrical inspector to condemn the entire Deer Hollow grid for safety violations. And trust me, with the shortcuts they took, they'll never turn the lights on again. Morales nodded slowly. You heard him, Bethany. Get in the car. As they drove away, the valley returned to its frozen, silent state. I went back inside, poured a fresh cup of coffee, and sat by the window. The HOA was exposed. The unification plan was dead, and tomorrow the lawsuits would begin. I watched the darkness for a long time, the steady hum of my own power the only sound in the room. They thought I was just a man on a ranch. They forgot that when you try to steal the ground from under an engineer, you'd better be sure you aren't standing on the part he's already wired. I'm Jake Carter, and if you think this was the only trick the HOA had up its sleeve, you don't know the half of it. If you want to see how I dismantled the rest of their board, stick around. There's plenty more justice coming.